What if the thing sitting in your pantry right now has more influence over your colon than your own DNA? That question sounds impossible until you look at the numbers. Fewer than 1 in 10 colon cancer cases can be traced back to inherited genes. That means the overwhelming majority of cases are shaped by something else entirely. Something repeated, something quiet, something most people never think to question because it looks completely ordinary. A bottle of oil, a snack wrapped in plastic, a sandwich eaten without a second thought. None of these feel dangerous in the moment. That is exactly why they matter. Colon cancer rarely announces itself early. It does not usually begin with pain or an obvious symptom that sends someone rushing to a doctor. It builds in silence, cell by cell, decade by decade, while the body carries on as if nothing is happening. And for adults over 60, it remains one of the leading causes of cancer death. Not because it is unstoppable, but because it is misunderstood. By the time most people notice something is wrong, the disease has often had years, sometimes over a decade, to develop unnoticed. So here is the real question worth sitting with. If genetics only explains a small fraction of cases, what is actually driving the rest? The answer lives in places far more familiar than a laboratory or a family history chart. It lives in the kitchen. And by the end of this, you will understand not only what to watch for, but what your body may already be trying to tell you, including one commonly dismissed symptom most people over 60 explain away without a second thought. Let's begin with something almost everyone uses without thinking twice: cooking oil. Most people treat oil as interchangeable. Pour it in the pan, cook the food, move on. But at a molecular level, not all oils behave the same way once heat is introduced. Oils rich in polyunsaturated fats, like many refined vegetable, corn, and soybean oils, contain chemical bonds that are inherently unstable under high temperatures. When oil starts to smoke, or when it carries a faintly sharp, stale smell after reheating, that is not simply a cooking mishap. It is a sign of chemical breakdown, producing byproducts like aldehydes and lipid peroxides. Here is why that matters for your colon specifically. The inner lining of your large intestine is protected by a delicate, continuously renewing layer of cells called the mucosa. Think of it as a living wallpaper, constantly replacing itself to keep the barrier between your gut and your bloodstream intact. That renewal process is remarkably efficient, but it is not indestructible. When it is repeatedly exposed to irritating compounds, like those produced by overheated or reused oil, the renewal cycle can become disrupted. Over years, that disruption creates the kind of unstable cellular environment where abnormal growth becomes more likely to take hold. This is not about a single stir-fry ruining your health. One meal will not define your future. What matters is repetition. The oil that gets reused past its smoke point, the bottle sitting near a warm stove slowly oxidizing week after week, the habit repeated hundreds of times over a lifetime without ever being reconsidered. Small shifts change that trajectory. Oils with more stable fat structures, like avocado oil, tolerate high heat far better. Extra virgin olive oil remains an excellent choice, particularly when used raw or at lower temperatures. These are not dramatic lifestyle overhauls. They are quiet adjustments that compound, invisibly, over years. But oil is only one piece of a larger pattern. Walk into any kitchen and look at what sits on the shelf, untouched by refrigeration, unaffected by time. Crackers, packaged snack bars, flavored chips, bottled sauces, sodas, diet or otherwise, industrially processed juices. These products share a defining trait. They are engineered to resist decay. And that is precisely the problem. Anything capable of sitting on a shelf for months without spoiling is, almost by definition, something your gut bacteria were never designed to recognize as food. This connects to a part of your body science has only recently begun to fully appreciate: the gut microbiome. Trillions of bacteria live inside your intestines, quietly influencing digestion, immune regulation, and even inflammation levels throughout your body. This ecosystem is remarkably responsive to what you feed it. Research has shown that certain emulsifiers, common additives used to extend shelf life and improve texture in processed foods, can alter the protective mucus layer lining the colon and increase intestinal permeability. In simple terms, the barrier separating the inside of your gut from your immune system becomes thinner and more reactive. Picture the exterior wall of an old house. When the paint is intact, everything beneath it stays protected from wind, rain, and time. But when that paint is chipped away, slowly, repeatedly, day after day, the material underneath eventually begins to weaken. Your colon lining works in a strikingly similar way. It is not one dramatic event that causes damage, it is thousands of small ones, repeated so consistently that the body eventually stops being able to fully repair itself between exposures. As concerning as ultra-processed food is, there is one category researchers point to with even greater certainty, and the biological pathway connecting it to colon cancer is remarkably direct. Processed meat. Think bacon, sausages, deli meats, hot dogs, smoked ham, salami, occupies a category most people would never expect. The World Health Organization classifies processed meat as a Group 1 carcinogen. That classification does not mean it might contribute to cancer under rare conditions. It means the evidence linking it to cancer, specifically colorectal cancer, is considered scientifically sufficient. It sits, statistically, in the same evidence category as tobacco. Here is the mechanism behind that classification. Processed meats are commonly preserved using nitrites and nitrates. On their own, in small amounts, these compounds are not inherently alarming. But inside processed meat, combined with high protein content, exposure to heat during cooking, and interaction with stomach acid during digestion, nitrites can convert into compounds called nitrosamines. Nitrosamines are genotoxic, meaning they have the capacity to damage DNA directly within the cells lining the colon. Consider a pattern seen often in clinical practice. Someone in their early 70s, no family history of cancer, describing what sounds like a reasonably clean diet. Then, almost in passing, they mention a daily habit, deli turkey on a sandwich, most days of the week, chosen specifically because it felt like the healthy option. Lean, low-fat, convenient. That is the exact trap the word processed allows people to fall into. A label reading natural or lean says nothing about the curing chemistry taking place inside the product. Years of daily, seemingly harmless exposure can accumulate in ways that routine blood work often fails to detect, until the pattern has already progressed. Fresh, unprocessed red meat tells a different, more nuanced story, and should not be placed in the same category as its processed counterpart. Most gastroenterology guidelines suggest keeping fresh red meat intake to roughly 500 grams of raw weight per week, balanced with fish, poultry, legumes, and a substantial base of vegetables. Moderation, not elimination, is the operative principle here. There is one more detail worth understanding, because it applies even to meat that starts out completely fresh. When meat, including chicken and fish, not just red meat, is charred or heavily browned during cooking, a chemical reaction occurs between amino acids and high heat. This reaction produces compounds called heterocyclic amines, which, much like nitrosamines, carry an established association with increased colorectal cancer risk. The darker and more charred the crust, the higher the concentration of these compounds. This does not mean grilling must be abandoned entirely. It means the char on your dinner plate deserves to be a conscious choice rather than an unexamined default. Now here is where the conversation shifts towards something far more powerful than any single dietary adjustment, something most people fundamentally misunderstand. When people hear the word colonoscopy, they almost universally think of it as a detection tool. Go in, get looked at, get told yes or no. That framing captures only a fraction of what the procedure actually does. During a colonoscopy, a thin, flexible camera travels the entire length of the colon, allowing a physician to examine the lining for anything irregular, polyps, unusual lesions, abnormal texture, or coloration. And when a polyp is found, which happens frequently in adults over 45, it is not simply photographed and left in place for a future decision. It is removed immediately. in the same procedure, with no additional surgery and no separate anesthesia required. This matters because polyps are, in essence, cancer's earliest possible form, a precursor stage, not yet malignant, but with the potential to become so if left undisturbed. Most colorectal cancers do not appear suddenly out of nowhere. They begin as small, typically benign growths on the colon wall. Left in place, some of these growths can slowly transform over a window that generally spans 5 to 15 years. A colonoscopy performed at the right time does not merely detect cancer that already exists, it can interrupt the biological sequence before cancer ever fully forms. In clinical experience, the patients who leave a colonoscopy appointment feeling the most relief are often not the ones who hear, "Everything looks completely clear." They are the ones who hear something closer to, "We found 2 small polyps, we removed them, you're finished." Those patients walk out having changed their own trajectory, sometimes without even realizing how significant that shift really was. For adults at average risk, screening conversations typically begin around age 45. For those with a first-degree relative, a parent or sibling who had colon cancer, that conversation often needs to start earlier, generally between ages 35 and 40, depending on individual history. The procedure itself is performed under light sedation. Most people report feeling little to nothing during it, and serious complications remain rare. Prevention, though, is not only about what gets removed, it is also about what gets rebuilt. The colon, remarkably, has the capacity to recover. The microbiome can be replenished, the mucosal lining can regenerate. But like the damage that accumulates slowly, repair also depends on consistency, not a single dramatic change. Fermented foods represent one of the most well-supported categories here, but not all fermented products carry equal value. Plain yogurt containing live active cultures, kefir, kombucha with minimal added sugar, and unpasteurized sauerkraut all fall into this group. Pasteurization, notably, eliminates the very bacteria that give fermented foods their benefit, so reading labels carefully matters. Sauerkraut in particular stands out because it delivers both prebiotic fiber, which feeds beneficial bacteria, and probiotic bacteria themselves, together in a single food, a combination that shows up frequently in conversations around gut-focused nutrition. Structural fiber is the second major category, and the distinction here matters. This refers to fiber from whole plant foods, not fiber supplements. Seeds are among the most underused sources available. Flaxseed, chia, and sesame, when soaked in water for several hours, form a soluble gel that slows digestive transit, reduces mucosal irritation, and carries measurable anti-inflammatory properties. Vegetable-based drinks made from spinach, cucumber, celery, kiwi, ginger, and turmeric, consumed with the pulp intact rather than strained out, provide another valuable fiber source, since that pulp is precisely what feeds beneficial gut bacteria. One particularly interesting pairing worth understanding involves broccoli and dry mustard powder. Broccoli contains a compound called glucoraphanin, which on its own has fairly limited bioavailability in the body. But when combined with dry mustard powder, an enzyme present in the mustard converts glucoraphanin into sulforaphane, a compound that has been studied extensively for its role in activating cellular defense pathways, including mechanisms associated with resistance to abnormal cell growth. It is a small, specific combination, but one grounded in genuine biochemistry rather than trend-driven nutrition advice. While all of this unfolds internally, day after day, your body is also communicating outwardly, in ways far more accessible than most people realize. Stool, uncomfortable as it may be to discuss, offers real information. Normal stool varies in shade of brown and is roughly cylindrical in shape. Frequency has a wider normal range than most assume. Anywhere from 3 times a day to once every 3 days can fall within typical variation. What actually deserves attention is not day-to-day fluctuation, but persistent, unexplained change. If someone has been consistently regular for years, and that pattern shifts without an obvious dietary cause, that shift is worth mentioning to a physician. Stool that becomes narrow and ribbon-like, not occasionally but consistently over several weeks, can indicate something pressing against the interior of the colon. Stool that becomes unusually pale, almost clay-colored, can point toward changes in bile flow that warrant medical evaluation. And blood in the toilet after a bowel movement deserves direct, honest attention. Many people over 60 attribute this automatically to hemorrhoids, and often that assumption is correct. Hemorrhoids are a common and treatable cause of rectal bleeding, but polyps and tumors can cause the same symptom. The responsible approach is not panic, but reporting it rather than dismissing it after a single occurrence. Beyond stool changes, persistent fatigue paired with any of these signs, unexplained weight loss, or a low-grade sense of fullness or pressure in the lower abdomen that does not resolve over time, all warrant a conversation with a healthcare provider. Not because every instance signals something serious, but because in the cases where it does, early evaluation genuinely changes outcomes. Which brings the conversation back to where it began, that striking, easily overlooked statistic. Fewer than 1 in 10 colon cancer cases can be explained by inherited genetics. Most people, understandably, respond to a cancer diagnosis in the family by looking backward, searching the family tree for an explanation that feels fixed and outside personal control. For certain cancers, that instinct holds real weight. For colon cancer, the evidence tells a different story. The majority of cases develop in people without significant hereditary risk, people who ate a certain way for years, who carried low-grade chronic inflammation without realizing it, who postponed a colonoscopy because they felt perfectly fine, and who never connected an ordinary kitchen habit to something quietly developing inside the body. The people who catch this early, and there are many, tend to share one trait in common. They never assumed that feeling fine was proof that everything was fine. They understood that the body tends to signal before it breaks, and they chose to pay attention while those signals were still subtle. That is not a matter of genetic luck. It is a decision, available to almost anyone, starting today. None of this requires overhauling your entire life overnight. It might simply mean reconsidering the oil sitting beside your stove, being honest about how often processed meat shows up on your plate, or finally scheduling the colonoscopy conversation that has quietly sat on a to-do list for years. Small, specific, compounding adjustments are what actually shift the internal environment over time, and that environment is either the soil where disease takes root or the ground that keeps it from ever forming at all. Your colon is not a passive bystander in this story. It is a living record of everything you have chosen to put into it, meal after meal, year after year, compounding quietly in one direction or the other. The oil in your pantry, the processed snack reached for during a tired afternoon, the sandwich meat assumed to be the healthy choice, the screening appointment postponed one more year. None of these decide the outcome alone. Together, over time, they shape it entirely. Your body has likely already been sending signals. The only real question left is whether you are ready to start listening to them.